He was a hero who came home, but he was haunted by failure. Caleb Stone swore he wouldn't save anyone else because the only person he couldn't save was his best friend. Now, trapped on the Wrath Pass in the worst blizzard in a decade, he faces a choice: abandon a sick old man and his 10-year-old grandson to freeze, or risk failure once more, and find redemption not on the battlefield, but in his own cold cabin. Can a former SEAL and his German Shepherd save strangers, but truly save his own soul? What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where you watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The Cascade Mountains of Washington State were already preparing their annual siege. Far below, the city of Seattle was merely damp and gray. But here, on the higher reaches of the highway, winter was an immediate, brutal entity. A sudden, violent squall line had slammed into the peaks, earning the route its local, ominous nickname, the Wrath Pass. The wind howled a warning through the dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock, and the temperature had plummeted so fast it felt like a physical blow. Inside a battered midnight blue Ford F-150, Caleb Stone gripped the steering wheel, his gloved hands steady. He was 40, his face a sharp, angular map of old habits and discipline, framed by short, dark hair streaked faintly with gray near the temples. A former Marine Raider, Caleb carried himself with a quiet, coiled intensity, the kind that bespoke a man perpetually braced for impact. His steel-gray eyes, though sharp and observant, held a distance, a shadow of an unspoken grief. He had bought this truck to drive away from things, not to them. His recent life had been defined by a desperate, silent need for isolation, a shield against the possibility of failure and loss he believed was inevitable around him. His only companion was Echo, a 7-year-old male German Shepherd. Echo was large and powerful, with a thick black and tan coat and the focused, intelligent amber eyes characteristic of a military working dog. He was Caleb's shadow and his anchor. Echo had served beside Caleb in the Marines, even taking a bullet in his flank, marked by a faint crescent-shaped scar, while covering Caleb during a chaotic extraction. He was disciplined, unnervingly calm, and the only living being Caleb still allowed himself to trust implicitly. They were driving nowhere in particular when the first blinding sheet of snow hit the windshield. Caleb turned on the wipers, their rhythmic squeak instantly lost in the sound of the wind. He tried to focus on the road, but his gaze drifted to the ignition. Dangling from the keyring was a tarnished silver Zippo lighter. It wasn't his. It belonged to Marcus "Mac" Reed, his closest friend and teammate, who died on a failed mission Caleb felt responsible for. Marcus had given it to him years ago, before deployment, having meticulously engraved a phrase into its side, "First volunteer." Marcus had always been the first to step up, the first to charge, the first to care. Caleb had carried the Zippo ever since, a heavy, silent reminder of the promise he couldn't keep and the man he couldn't save. He often told himself that by living alone, by refusing to be anyone's lifeline, he was protecting himself, and everyone else, from another Marcus. As the truck crept around a hairpin turn, Echo suddenly erupted. It wasn't a warning growl, but a sharp, insistent series of barks, his ears rotating forward, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the reach of the headlights. "What is it, boy?" Caleb muttered, braking, lightly. The snow was thick, a white curtain being torn apart by the wind, but as the truck slowed, the headlights cut through the maelstrom and illuminated two figures staggering along the narrow shoulder of the road. Caleb's throat tightened. No cars were visible. No town was nearby. They were impossibly far from safety. He reluctantly stopped the truck, the engine idling loudly in the white silence. He watched them for a heartbeat, his mind fighting an internal war. "Keep driving, Cole. It's not your problem. You'll only mess it up." But Echo's gaze was fixed on Caleb, a deep, unwavering command in his amber eyes. Caleb sighed, pushing down the reflexive need to isolate. He grabbed his heavy coat and yanked the door open. The wind immediately hit him, biting like glass. Echo bounded out and stood shoulder to shoulder with him, his posture instantly alert. "Hey!" Caleb shouted against the wind. "Are you two all right?" The two figures froze. They looked like ghosts in the storm. The taller figure turned first. Elias Thorne. He was a man well into his 70s, though still possessing the wiry frame of someone accustomed to hard work. His face was deeply lined, etched by sun and wind, but now dangerously pale, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. He wore a thin, threadbare tweed coat utterly inadequate for the storm. Elias was known in his small community for his stubborn independence and encyclopedic knowledge of regional herbs and remedies, a solitary figure often seen hiking the lower slopes. Now, however, all pride was gone, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and fear. He leaned heavily on a wooden walking stick. Beside him, clutching his arm, was his grandson, Leo Thorne. Leo was 10 years old, small for his age, with wide, intelligent blue eyes and a shock of auburn hair peeking out from under a thin wool cap. He was visibly shivering, his small body tightly bundled but ineffective against the cold. Leo carried a small, water-stained canvas backpack clutched close to his chest. Leo was an only child, deeply attached to his grandfather and sharing his quiet passion for the wilderness, though he was clearly struggling now. We're fine, son," Elias rasped, his voice rough with cold and effort. "Just trying to reach the old ranger station." "The ranger station is 10 miles back and abandoned," Caleb countered, his voice flat. "You won't make it to morning. Why are you out here?" Elias hesitated, his eyes darting away. He was too proud to admit the full truth, but the desperate situation forced his hand. He had gone off trail with Leo, far from the known paths, searching for the rare, dark-colored root known only as blackroot, which Elias believed was the only thing that could alleviate the worst symptoms of his worsening chronic lung condition. "My medicine," Elias managed to cough out, the sound tearing at his chest. "We took a wrong turn, searching for a path. We need help." His pride finally broken, Elias stumbled, slightly, catching himself on his grandson's shoulder. Leo looked up at Caleb, his blue eyes huge with a silent plea. Caleb saw the man's physical weakness, but also the fierce, protective love in his eyes, a love that had overridden all common sense. He thought of Marcus again, of his final, unheard plea for help. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the Zippo. "Don't let the world turn you cold, Cole." Elias saw the hesitation, the internal battle in Caleb's face. He pushed Leo slightly forward, his voice a strained whisper, desperate and weak. "Please, save the boy. He's a good kid. Just save Leo." That plea, selfless and absolute, broke Caleb's defense. It was not about him, or his mistakes, or his failure to save Marcus. It was about an immediate, present action. It was about the boy. Echo took a slow, deliberate step toward the shivering pair, tail low, ears pricked, a silent offering of trust. The dog's presence seemed to calm both Elias and Leo instantly. Caleb inhaled the icy air, the cold stinging his lungs. The ghosts of the past did not vanish, but they quieted. He made a choice. "Get in the truck," Caleb ordered, his voice suddenly sharp, disciplined. "Both of you. Now." He grabbed Elias's thin arm, steadying the old man, and ushered them towards the waiting warmth of the truck cab. The battered Ford F-150 groaned its way up the final, icy incline before Caleb's isolated cabin. The journey, though short, was treacherous. The wind slammed into the truck and the tires fought for purchase on the rapidly freezing road. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet wool, pine, and the strained, shallow breathing of Elias Thorne. Caleb pulled the truck close to the wooden porch, the engine finally falling silent, replaced by the relentless shriek of the blizzard. The cabin itself was a monolith of Caleb's deliberate withdrawal. rough-hewn pine logs, weathered and dark, half buried under new snow drifts. The interior was cold, dense with the smell of old dust, long-dormant wood smoke, and silence. Caleb moved with the efficiency of his former life, the ingrained discipline of a Marine raider taking over. He gently helped Elias out, supporting the elderly man's frail weight against the biting cold. Leo, the 10-year-old boy, darted ahead of them, his small frame trembling, but his focus entirely on the canvas backpack clutched to his chest. "Easy, sir. We're inside now," Caleb murmured, guiding Elias past the threshold. The cabin was frigid, the air stealing heat instantly. Caleb directed Elias to the hearth, easing him into an old faded leather armchair. Elias immediately began to shiver violently, his face a sickly gray-blue. Caleb wasted no time. He snatched kindling and paper, struck a match, and meticulously built a nest of flame in the stone fireplace. As the fire caught with a sharp crackle, its light spilled across the dusty wooden walls, offering the first promise of warmth. Leo Thorne, the boy, stood rigidly near the fire, refusing to remove his wet cap or coat. His attention was fixed on the small canvas backpack. "My bag, Mr. Stone," he whispered, his voice thin with anxiety. "It got so wet on the outside. Are the things inside safe?" "Let me worry about that, Leo," Caleb said, already pulling rough-spun woolen blankets from a high shelf, blankets left years ago by his parents. He draped one over Elias's legs and shoulders, then wrapped the second one tightly around Leo. Echo, the German shepherd, didn't sit by the fire. He circled the hearth once, his black and tan coat instantly flecked with melting snow, before settling deliberately on the dusty floor right beside Elias's chair. The dog rested his large head on his paws, his amber eyes fixed on the elderly man. Every few minutes, Echo would lift his head and gently nudge Elias's trembling hand with his wet muzzle, a quiet, instinctual form of canine reassurance. Caleb turned to the small propane-fueled range in the corner, pulling down a couple of cans of hearty beef stew. As the scent of cooking meat and herbs began to slowly push back the chill of the cabin, the stillness was abruptly broken by a static burst from the corner workbench. It was the military-grade satellite radio unit Caleb kept for emergencies, the one he rarely used. A voice cut, through the static, crisp, and professional, Sheriff Maya Rodriguez. She was a woman in her mid-30s, tall and lean, with olive skin and dark hair usually pulled back in a severe, functional ponytail. Maya was the local sheriff, known for her relentless dedication, clear mind, and an almost unnerving intuition when dealing with mountain emergencies. She wore a constant expression of firm, compassionate pragmatism. She and Caleb had an uneasy history. She respected his skills but was frustrated by his persistent refusal to engage in the town's search and rescue efforts following his return from service. "This is Sheriff Rodriguez on Channel 1. Repeat, visibility 0, roads impassable. Local ground crews stand by. We are looking for 2 individuals, an elderly male and a minor. Hikers reported overdue near the Wrath Pass trailhead. If anyone has contact with the Thorne family, advise immediately." Caleb's jaw tightened. He moved swiftly to the bench and slammed the off switch. The sudden silence in the cabin was heavy, charged with his avoidance. He didn't want to be involved with Maya's search, didn't want the responsibility of being the point of contact, and certainly didn't want the scrutiny. He was already doing his duty, he thought, but he needed to keep it anonymous, detached. He returned to the hearth, stirring the stew. Leo, now slightly warmer, unfolded his wet backpack. He pulled out its contents onto the rough wooden floor. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages damp at the edges, and an old, bulky Polaroid land camera, the kind that ejected instant film, with its leather straps still soggy. "This is my grandfather's," Leo whispered, holding up the camera. "He taught me how to take pictures of the mountain plants. We document them for his research." He pointed to the journal. "And this is our plant dictionary. He needs this." Caleb watched the boy carefully dry the lens of the camera with the corner of his blanket. seeing a concentration that belied his fear. It was a small, fragile insight into the intense, shared world between the old man and the boy, a world defined by botanical exploration, not fear. As the stew simmered, Elias stirred and coughed, his breathing still labored but less panicked. He watched Caleb move between the fire and the stove, efficient, silent, always alert. "The way you move," Elias rasped, his eyes clear for the first time. "Like you're waiting for a wire to trip. You were in the service, weren't you, son?" Caleb poured the stew into 3 chipped enamel bowls. He offered one to Elias, his face expressionless. "I was," he confirmed simply. He didn't elaborate. Elias nodded, taking the bowl with slow, careful hands. "Yes, I know that look. It's what we call the soldier's sight. You see threats where civilians see shadows. You can take the soldier out of the fight, but you can't take the war out of the man." Caleb sat on the edge of the hearth, eating slowly, feeling the older man's insight like an unwelcome intrusion. Leo, meanwhile, had finished his stew. He gently reached over and began petting Echo, who responded with a low, rumbling sigh of contentment. The boy's small fingers found the subtle crescent-shaped scar on Echo's flank. "Mr. Stone," Leo asked, his voice filled with childlike curiosity and innocence. "What happened here? Did a wild cat scratch him?" Caleb looked at the scar, a silent, familiar mark of a close call in a dusty, hot place far away. He paused, looking at the boy's earnest face, realizing this was the first personal question he had answered in months. He found the words surprisingly easily. "No, Leo. That was from a piece of metal, a long time ago. Echo was my partner, a working dog. We did a lot of things together. That scar, that means he saved my life. He took a hit that was meant for me." Elias looked at Caleb, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. It was more than just a scar, it was a story of loyalty, sacrifice, and survival. The silence that followed was not the isolating silence Caleb preferred, but one of shared understanding, a quiet comfort brought by the steady crackle of the newly roaring fire. The cold cabin was slowly starting to breathe again. The following morning dawned muted and heavy. Though the blizzard had temporarily subsided, the sky was a bruised, oppressive gray, promising more snow. Inside the cabin, a tentative warmth held the cold at bay, defined by the lingering scent of wood smoke and the rhythmic, labored breathing of Elias Thorne. The elderly man was sleeping soundly, exhaustion and the temporary comfort of the fire finally claiming him. Leo sat cross-legged by the hearth, meticulously sorting the contents of his now dry canvas backpack, his quiet focus almost meditative. Caleb Stone moved through the cabin, restless. The silence was too familiar, too reminiscent of the years he had spent intentionally avoiding the messy reality of the outside world. He needed purpose, a physical task to anchor himself to the present. He decided to clear the excessive clutter of dried pine needles and forgotten tools from the small storage nook near the kitchen, a space his father had once used as an impromptu workbench. Kneeling on the cold wooden floor, Caleb shoved aside rusty logging chains and dusty glass jars. His hand brushed against something heavy and smooth beneath a pile of old canvases. He pulled it out, a wooden box crafted from dark, aged cedar, its corners dovetailed with precision, clearly the work of his late father. Caleb's father had been a U.S. Forest Service firefighter, a man defined by his duty to the community and the wildland, a role Caleb had often seen as a rival for his mother's affection during his youth. Caleb sat back on his heels and gently lifted the lid. The box smelled faintly of pine sap and old parchment. Inside lay several items, not military gear, but tools of a different kind of war. Thick, rolled-up maps, hand-drawn and annotated with faded ink and pencil. These were not the standardized, easily accessible maps of today. They were detailed topographical surveys of the Wrath Pass area, marked with specific landmarks, water sources, and, most importantly, faint, dotted lines labeled RC Emergency Access. These old routes were more precise and often far more direct than any modern trail Caleb had ever seen. Beside the maps lay a heavy bronze medal, intricately embossed with an image of a cedar tree shielding a mountain hiker. Tucked beneath the medal was a small brittle note, yellowed with time. To Robert Cole, for your courage and the access path you forged. You saved my life and that of my son. Gratitude from the Johnson family. Caleb traced the words on the note, a sudden, sharp ache in his chest. His father, Robert Cole, had been a first volunteer, too, saving lives through preparation and knowledge of the land, not just through raw combat. This realization struck Caleb hard. He had spent years trying to reconcile his failure to save Marcus with the legacy of duty he had inherited, never realizing his father's work was the exact, quiet kind of heroism he needed to embrace. As Caleb carefully re-rolled the maps, the cabin was once again pierced by the sharp, familiar crackle of his satellite phone ringing. Not the radio, but a direct emergency line he kept operational. He snatched it up. "Stone," Caleb answered curtly. "Caleb, it's Maya." The voice on the other end was Sheriff Maya Rodriguez, sharp and focused despite the obvious strain. Maya had been driving a snowmobile after her truck was stalled, working through the heavy brush. She was a woman in her mid-30s. White, with strong practical features, dark eyes and dark hair pulled tightly back. Her dedication to her duty was almost fierce, a result of growing up watching her small town suffer from isolation during severe weather. "We've confirmed the identities, Elias and Leo Thorne. The bad news is they were heading off trail near the Thunder Cedar stands. They were actively searching for Black Root." Caleb's steel-gray eyes narrowed. "Black Root? The medicinal root?" "Yes, it's a rare, potent herb, sometimes used for respiratory illnesses. Elias has chronic lung deterioration. His friends say he believed this was his only chance before the winter locked everything down. They have been missing for nearly 48 hours, Caleb. We're running out of time." Elias, who had been stirring in his sleep, coughed violently and woke up, his eyes fluttering open. He listened to the conversation intently. When Caleb lowered the phone, Elias nodded slowly, a deep weariness in his face. "She's right," Elias rasped, his voice still ragged. "That's why we were out there. My disease. It progresses fast now. The conventional medicines only manage the pain. The Black Root, it's strong. It was our hope." Leo, who had been listening to the hushed exchange, finished stacking his photographs. He held up his leather-bound journal, flipping to a carefully drawn sketch of a dark, twisted root. "Grandpa taught me how to find it. It always grows near the thunder cedars, the ones struck by lightning. He said the shock gives the root its power." Leo's quiet, desperate dedication was palpable. He then spread out a series of his own instant photographs from his Polaroid land camera across the floor, close-ups of specific mosses, fungi, and tree formations, all carefully labeled in a child's neat hand. "We weren't just lost," Leo insisted, his blue eyes pleading for understanding. "We were doing Grandpa's research." Caleb looked from the boy's earnest face to the old man's defeated posture, and then down at the worn map of his father. His father's hand-drawn lines seemed to leap off the aged paper. Caleb's own rigid military training had taught him that preparation saves lives. He suddenly saw his father's work not as a distraction from family, but as a profound, silent act of salvation. The old access routes his father had mapped were not for pleasure. They were forged by the same selfless imperative that had led Marcus to always be the first volunteer. His gaze fixed on one specific dotted line on the map labeled Whisper Gulch Bypass. This hidden path, unknown to modern rescue teams, cut straight through the most treacherous, currently snowbound ridge, leading directly down to a lower, safer valley, a route that would bypass the main landslide Maya had mentioned on the radio. It was a risk, but it was the only fast route out. Caleb felt the familiar cold knot of fear and PTSD loosen for the first time in years. This was not the chaotic fire of a battlefield. This was calculated action, built on the solid, generational foundation of his father's knowledge. He had the root. He had the knowledge. He had the reason. "Maya," Caleb said firmly into the phone, his voice regaining the steady command he hadn't used since leaving the Marines. "I have them. They are safe, but Elias needs medical attention fast, and I think I know a way out that your teams don't." The air outside the cabin was tense and heavy, thick with the scent of pine and moisture, a precursor to the second predicted blizzard. Caleb moved with focused intensity, his former military discipline resurfacing to manage the extreme environment. He had carefully studied his late father's map, the Whisper Gulch bypass route etched into his memory. He strapped the old map, protected by a plastic sheath, to his heavy coat, the tarnished Zippo First Volunteer still dangling, now feeling less like a burden and more like a compass. Elias Thorne was weaker than he let on, but possessed a quiet, stubborn resilience. He was wrapped in one of Caleb's heavy woolen jackets, looking like a small, determined warrior. Leo had packed the essentials: his camera, the plant journal, and the last of the cabin's dried beef jerky, moving with a surprising calmness born from the sudden competence of the adult guiding them. Echo was already waiting by the porch, ears twitching, sensing the imminent movement and the high stakes. "We move fast and stay close," Caleb instructed, his voice low and firm, the sound of command he hadn't used in years. "The snow will hit again within the hour. We are taking the old access route. It's steep, but it's the only path that bypasses the landslide Maya reported." They plunged into the deep woods behind the cabin, following the faint, overgrown lines marked by Robert Cole decades ago. The Whisper Gulch bypass was true to its name, a demanding, narrow track, clinging to the edge of the ridge. Caleb broke trail, his heavy boots crunching through the crusty snow, Echo running ahead and checking the stability of the ground, working exactly as he was trained to. Leo kept pace remarkably well, holding Elias's hand and helping the older man navigate the treacherous footing. They had been moving for nearly 40 minutes when the route abruptly ended. A wall of compacted snow and splintered logs, the result of a recent localized snow lurch, had slid down the embankment, completely blocking the narrow path. The detour would add hours, time they simply didn't have. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The old, familiar dread, the fear of failure, clawed at his throat. He had calculated everything, trusted his father's map, and still, the mountain had won. He slammed his fist against a nearby tree trunk, the muffled impact swallowed by the snow. "I can't believe this," he muttered, running his hand over his close-cropped hair, streaks of gray visible beneath the damp snow. It was then that Elias was seized by a violent coughing fit. The sound was horrifying, a deep, wet, rattling sound that brought the old man to his knees. He gasped for air, his lips turning blue, his body convulsing against the cold. "Grandpa!" Leo cried, dropping his backpack and frantically trying to help Elias sit up. Caleb rushed to them. Elias was struggling for consciousness, his chronic lung condition exacerbated by the extreme cold. And exertion. His need for the Black Root was no longer a research quest or a hope. It was a sudden, terrifying medical emergency. I can't breathe." Elias managed to wheeze out, his eyes wide with fear. Leo, his face streaked with tears but his mind startlingly clear, pointed frantically toward a massive, ancient cedar tree a few yards off the obstructed path. The tree stood apart, its trunk scarred and blackened by a historical lightning strike. "The Thunder Cedar!" Leo yelled, his voice strained. "Grandpa taught me. The Black Root grows where the shock hits the ground hardest. Near the Thunder Cedar, Mr. Stone, please." Driven by the boy's desperate clarity, Caleb grabbed a shovel he carried and, flanked by Echo, rushed to the base of the massive tree. The ground was frozen solid, but Echo immediately began to dig with surprising speed, his powerful legs throwing snow and frozen earth aside, his keen nose guiding Caleb. Within minutes, Caleb's shovel struck something hard. He knelt, tearing away the remaining earth with his gloved hands, and found it, a cluster of dark, twisted roots, their outer skin black and thick, exactly matching the drawings in Leo's journal. He quickly scraped a portion clean and forced Elias to chew the root. The effect was almost immediate. Elias's spasm slowly subsided. He coughed once more, a deep expulsion, and then began to breathe, shallowly but steadily. The old man slumped against the cedar trunk, exhausted but alive. While Elias was recovering, Echo sniffed intently at the trunk of the thunder cedar, then began pawing the snow near its base, distinct from the black root area. Caleb, sensitive to his dog's trained instincts, investigated. Brushing away the snow and bark, he found a faint, almost invisible mark carved into the cedar. A small, stylized arrow painted with high-visibility orange, partially covered by ice. It was a search and rescue blaze mark, distinctively belonging to the local sheriff's department, Maya Rodriguez's own personal trail marker. Caleb's stomach dropped. This confirmed that Sheriff Maya Rodriguez, the woman in her mid-30s with the pragmatic dark eyes and firm ponytail, was on foot and dangerously close, following the standard rescue routes which would lead her directly into the area of the major landslide and the unstable terrain beyond. She was putting herself at immense risk, doing the job Caleb had avoided. His father's map had a superior route, but Maya was committed to the known path. The snow began to fall again, heavy, wet flakes marking the start of the second storm. Caleb looked at Elias, whose breathing was now stable, and then at the obstructed trail. He had the black route, and Elias was temporarily safe, but they couldn't backtrack, and they couldn't wait. He looked at the thunder cedar, the marker, and then at the Zippo on his jacket, feeling the heavy, cold metal. The guilt over Marcus, the failure to save his friend, crystallized into a single, necessary choice. He turned to Leo. "Leo, listen to me. This is important." He detached Echo's lead and handed it to the boy. "Echo knows the rest of the path down. It will bypass this slide. He will not leave you. You take your grandfather and you follow Echo. Do you understand? Follow Echo exactly. He will lead you to a safe shelter down in the lower gulch, a supply shack." Leo, eyes wide but resolute, nodded firmly, clutching the lead. Caleb knelt before Elias. "You're stable for now, sir. Leo and Echo will get you out. I have to find the sheriff." Elias, still weak, gripped Caleb's arm with surprisingly strong fingers. "Go. But come back, son. That boy needs you now." With a final, sharp command to Echo, "Protect!" Caleb turned his back on the safety of the known path and his relieved passengers. He began running in the opposite direction, toward the danger where Maya's marker led, moving with the speed and precision he thought he had buried forever. His mission was no longer merely to save 2 souls, but to stop a third from following the wrong path. Caleb Stone ran with a focus he hadn't known since his last combat deployment. He followed the faint orange blazes, Sheriff Maya Rodriguez markers, cutting through the heavy, fresh snowfall. His heavy boots pounded a steady rhythm, the icy air burning in his lungs, but the internal fear that had paralyzed him for years was replaced by the clarity of action. He was racing toward danger to save someone else, and the simple act felt like a reconnection with the man Marcus had wanted him to be. He found her not far from where the main road was supposed to be. Sheriff Maya Rodriguez, struggling on a steep, icy incline. She was navigating the treacherous obstructed path on foot, her rescue equipment weighing her down. She was exhausted, her olive-skinned face streaked with sweat and snow, her firm resolve momentarily broken by the immense physical challenge. "Sheriff!" Caleb yelled, his voice carrying surprising authority through the falling snow. Maya spun around, her expression instantly shifting from fierce determination to utter shock. "Caleb, what in God's name are you doing here? You should be staying put." "You're walking into a major slide zone," Caleb retorted, ignoring her question. He moved quickly, checking her footing. "The access route is blocked. I have a way out. my father's route." He gestured back toward the ancient cedar and the direction he had just come from. "It's the only safe passage down. We have to move now." Without question, Maya recognized the professional command in his tone. She followed him, and as they moved quickly along the safer, hidden path Caleb had discovered, the tension broke enough for conversation. Caleb knew he owed her an explanation, not just for his presence, but for his past silence. "The reason I stayed away, the reason I never answered your calls for search and rescue teams." He paused, the words heavy and difficult. "It was Marcus, my friend. I was his team leader. He died in a firefight because I made the wrong call. I'm responsible. I carried that failure home with me, Maya. I believed if I tried to save anyone else, I would just fail again." Maya listened, her breathing ragged from the pace, but her dark eyes held genuine compassion. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady and true. "The man I see right now, the one who left safety to warn me and save 2 people, he isn't a failure. The only failure is letting a ghost dictate the rest of your life. Saving one life today doesn't erase the old mistakes, but it gives you a new beginning." Her simple, powerful words, a practical kind of grace, struck him deeper than any military debriefing ever had. It was the first time he felt absolution wasn't required, only forward motion. They continued the rapid trek until they broke through the trees near a small derelict structure in the lower gulch. It was the supply shack Caleb had sent Elias and Leo towards. He saw fresh prints in the snow, large paw prints belonging to a German, shepherd, and smaller, human tracks. "There!" Maya gasped, relief flooding her face. She recognized the shack. It was an emergency cache she had provisioned years ago, a safe point designed to hold basic supplies. Inside the small, drafty structure, they found Elias Thorne sitting on a cot wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket from the stash, looking pale but stable. Leo sat next to him, his small hand firmly holding the lead of Echo, who was dutifully standing sentinel at the door, his black and tan coat dusted with snow. "Mr. Cole!" Leo exclaimed, jumping up, his earlier fear replaced by pure joy. "Echo brought us right here. He's the best guide." Elias looked at Caleb, then at Maya. "You came back, son," he whispered, a profound relief settling over his aged features. While Maya radioed for a medical extraction team that could safely navigate the lower valley roads, Leo quietly approached Caleb. He carefully opened his canvas backpack and retrieved the old Polaroid camera. He pressed a button, and the instant photo that had been developing popped out. It was a clear, focused, if slightly off-center, shot of Echo standing guard by the fire. He shyly handed it to Caleb. "This is my first good picture," Leo said softly. "Please keep it. Grandpa and I would never be lost if we had you and Echo with us." The innocent faith in his eyes solidified Caleb's commitment to the path forward. Once the specialized rescue team arrived and took Elias and Leo to the hospital for observation, Caleb and Echo returned to the cold cabin. The second storm passed, leaving the mountains quiet and stunningly bright. Caleb's decision was made. He was done running. He spent the next few weeks working with Maya, using his father's detailed maps and his own military expertise to clear, mark, and reinforce the old rescue paths. He contacted local veterans and former search and rescue volunteers. He poured his savings and his disciplined energy into the project. He officially registered his place with the county, the Marines' haven. In a final, quiet act of acceptance, Caleb walked to his hearth. He removed the tarnished Zippo lighter, the one engraved with First Volunteer, from his keyring. He didn't throw it into the fire or bury it in the snow. He placed it carefully on the mantel above the hearth, letting the firelight reflect off the silver. It was no longer a symbol of failure, but a standard, a challenge he was finally ready to meet. Sometimes we wait for God to send us a miracle with wings and trumpets. But the truth is, the most profound miracles often arrive quietly, not in a flash of light, but through the hands of ordinary people, through the strangers who choose to stop their trucks in the fiercest storm. They are the angels without wings, placed exactly where they are needed, carrying the tools and knowledge required to heal what is broken. If this story of faith and the quiet courage of a first volunteer touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still walks the earth. Leave a comment below with your own story of receiving grace. May God bless you and every soul who still believes that mercy and human connection can turn the coldest storm into the warmest new beginning.